So good morning and welcome once again to the Insperity Business Resiliency Series webcast. This fall, we've been tackling many of the primary issues facing business leaders today, learning to adapt to the unique circumstances we're all facing in a post-pandemic world. Factors that, when combined with things like record inflation and an unprecedented job market, these things are becoming increasingly complex. On top of all that, we're contemplating the realities of the impact of a potential economic downturn in the months ahead. So all of these factors combine to make one thing incredibly clear. Your path to business success relies now more than ever on the quality of your people. But with things like wage growth on the rise, this is not a situation that you can necessarily recruit your way through. Now, to be sure, it's always healthy to have a mix of external candidates in your system, bringing new and more diverse experience and perspectives to your business. But we cannot rely on that approach alone. We must consider how a comprehensive training and development strategy can have a multiplier effect on the engagement of your existing team, and then consequently, a significant lift to your business results. So by investing in your people, equipping them with the tools and the resources they need to level up their skills, you are then able to double down on discretionary effort. And the research backs this up. Earlier in this series, a few months ago, we spoke with Gallup Chief Scientist Jim Harder, where he emphasized that one of the most critical disciplines that today's managers must master is the intentional and proactive investment in their team members' career development. Clearly, there are hard skills, the practical knowledge that you need to acquire to refine existing processes and then unlock the next great product or solution for your business. But there's also those things that we would call soft skills, things like adaptability and trust and resilience, things that can be taught, but they must also be learned through experience and mentorship. So how do we create that kind of culture, a culture of innovation that builds individuals and teams that are readying your business for the future? It must be a culture by design, and it's one of the primary ways to navigate the countervailing pressures that business leaders are facing in today's increasingly complex environment. So that's our topic for today, innovation from within, upskilling your workforce to build a future-ready business. My name is Michael Lipe, and I'm Managing Director of Brand and Marketing Strategy here at Insperity. I'm the host of the Insperity Business Resiliency webinar series, and I'm so pleased to be joined by two of Insperity's most trusted and experienced experts on this topic. Sarah Grimstead is one of our panelists today. She's Insperity's Regional Vice President in our growth organization. Sarah Grimstead began with Insperity over 20 years ago as an orientation representative, where she provided training and onboarding for our small and medium-sized client companies. She then navigated her way through various positions of increasing responsibility into her current role as a sales regional vice president. As an accomplished sales manager, Sarah prides herself on developing each member of her team and helping them achieve their business and personal goals. Certainly appropriate for today's discussion. And her background in human resources, sales, and management allows her to truly connect with both her team and the clients that they serve. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Great. And our other panelist is Pete Hinojosa, Insperity's Director of Thought Leadership. Pete has spent his career as an accomplished business owner and teacher, where he has been recognized 3 times as an outstanding educator in the nation. He's also one of 10 in the world to hold a master trainer certification from Personality Insights in the model of human behavior. Pete has been with Insperity for more than 10 years, where he has designed and led many of the company's leadership training and development initiatives. So thanks, Pete, to you as well for sharing your insights with us today.
Yep, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Good. All right, great to have both of you. Let's jump into our session. Pete, I'm going to start with you. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, today's increasingly tight labor market is really emphasizing this need to train and develop the skills within our existing teams as a primary strategy for preparing our business for the future. So, and I think what we've seen is that very few people would argue that from a principled standpoint, but sort of in practice or in reality, unless the roles there are mandated regulatory requirements for continued training or certification, many companies just don't have this high tolerance threshold for allocating an abundance of time and resources to proactive employee training and development. So why is that? And why is it so important that we overcome that tendency?
Yeah, I thought about that, and as we spoke earlier and tried to digest all this information, one of the things that always comes to my mind is, I wrote down a handful of them, but first off, training can be seen as expensive, and then secondly, training can be seen as something that doesn't get used. We put it in a drawer. It's something that some people think is frivolous. I like the term, we did that one time. So that one's always a good one. So we did that once. And so that was like 5 years ago. So we've already got that down. unless it's directly related to competency or results, it might be seen as non-essential. And then I think a lot of times companies believe we hire people with the competencies they already need. So why would we need to do extra training for them on top of already getting the resume that's already built to do that competency? And then there's one other one that I like to say, and it's especially important for what we do at Insperity as well, is that there's moments where training is actually not the solution. It's actually it's a process problem. And so I've seen instances where someone will say, well, we need to do time management training. And the reality is it has nothing to do with time management. It might be a bad time and attendance process, or it might be a bad process that you're using that's increasing risk for your people to spend more time in that bad process. And so we like to look at those processes and say to ourselves, does that really need training, or do we need a more effective tool or resource that will help you be more successful? I've had lots and lots of people ask me to put together training and development for them. And I always try to break it into three parts. One is think about the competency. Competency is the demonstrated ability to do something. You also have a capability that you're looking for, something that's going to be ready-made for the future. You have the connecting piece to the competency. How do you connect to the person each day? And then finally, you have the big cultural question that happens every time before you do either one of those. Are we willing to do the day-to-day stuff to connect with people? What's our tolerance for that? And finally, what's our tolerance to actually demonstrate that we believe training is essential for the competency in which we need? Last little piece, why do I think it's so important to overcome that tendency? If you look at even Malcolm Gladwell or Jeff Colvin, and you think of the books Blink or Talent is Overrated, each one of them has a different vantage point on what's called the 10,000 hours. That's 9 years of at least 3 hours of a day to get really good at something. So I would say that if you really want to master something, it's going to take a little bit of effort, and to have a mindset to demonstrate that you believe in your people and training and development, at least do the 9 years. I mean, give them the 3 hours, right? Peter Senge, the fifth discipline, when I was an educator, we used that a lot to talk about the environment of creating a innovation within a teaching environment. You think of James Clear, the Atomic Habits, where every habit builds on itself to create a behavior that you're looking for. I thought of Ritz-Carlton. They spend 250 hours a year on their people training and developing. That could equal 5 hours a week. But you think of someone like that offers a premium product, and they invest 250 hours a year in training and development. And then finally, my last thought on that is that if you look at even Blanchard's study on situational leadership, when you get to a level of autonomy of what he would call D3 or D4, someone that can do their job with a little support, or someone can do it independently, you get 3 times the ROI or 10 times the ROI when you train and develop people. So that's my kickoff thoughts.
Yeah, that's obviously there's a lot of research, a lot of great thinking around that. I love your 3 C's model. I think that's really helpful to remember. Sarah, I want to turn to you. Obviously, there's the commitments that we need to make. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process that we identify and refining those processes. But I want to get your perspective from a different point of view here. We've discussed, these topics in some degree in previous sessions of our series, that there seems to be this employee-centric market in today's environment. And one wherein the candidates are expecting for there to be comprehensive training and development there in the organization that they're considering. So, the organization that you lead, Sarah, is experiencing a lot of growth. And so you know firsthand the specific challenges that hiring managers are facing on this topic. We want the right level of experience in a candidate, but we also want to pay them at a competitive rate. Is it realistic to expect that we can find candidates who have both?
Not today. I think that today's market is certainly unique, and all markets are cyclical. Currently, we are still in a very employee focused market where employees typically have multiple job offers that we're competing against. And so there has to be certainly some compromise, but I think it's bigger than just skill set at the right price. I think that if you're really looking at building a world-class organization, you have to think about more than that in your hires. I think you have to think about cultural fit. Certainly someone with all the skill sets in the world that isn't a good cultural fit for what you build your organization is probably not going to be successful. And then I think internal drivers are as important, if not more important, than the actual skill set in a lot of cases. Why that person is going to perform and what they hold themselves accountable to accomplishing, I think, is a huge part of someone's success. So, you can find someone who has all the right drivers, is a great cultural fit, has the right skill set, and you just simply might not be able to afford them in this market, unfortunately.
Right. That gets into that question of a culture by design, in the sense that we're intentionally looking for people that don't just check the boxes, but that they actually embody the values that we have as an organization. And those are the kind of people that we want to make those investments in from a training and development standpoint to help them get from good to great. Right. You mentioned the idea of compromise. And so I want to sort of nuance that a little bit more. There is a need to compromise, particularly in today's environment in the hiring process. But what are those things that we should never compromise in that process?
Yeah. So for me, and this is a lesson I had to learn as a hiring manager, I learned I could never compromise on cultural fit, because I found very early on in my leadership career that when I did that, when I hired people that looked like they had all the right skill sets, but didn't fit in culture-wise to what I was trying to build on my team, they by and large failed. And that's a really painful thing, not just for them, but for the organization as well. So in my experience, I never compromise on cultural fit. I never compromise on internal drivers, because those you can't really develop it. People either have it or they don't. But I've found over time that I can certainly build skill sets, which is why that development piece is so important. And I think for employers today, I think that you have to just be really self-aware that if you are going to compromise, or if you feel you have to compromise, especially around skill set, you have to go into that new hire with an eyes wide open view. You have to say that it's going to take more time and more effort and maybe a longer runway to get this person up to a level of proficiency that maybe a few years ago I would have expected right out of the gate. And then you have to ask yourself, turn the mirror inward, and two things. Number one, am I willing to put that amount of work and development into this person? If the answer is no, you shouldn't hire them for their sake as much as yours. And then the second question you have to say is, I have the desire and the willingness to train them, but do I have the program in place to do that? Because you really do have to put the program in place before you make the hire so that you can ensure success.
Well, that is really good. Those two factors really make all the difference. So Pete, I'm going to come back to you. I'd like your perspective on this topic. And Sarah mentioned this idea of these intrinsic drivers, these internal motivations that you look for, around cultural fit and capability and productivity. But it does take two to tango right here. So employees will need to see a clear upside for them to give that type of discretionary effort or that heightened level of engagement, to take on sort of new training or put their comfort at risk, assume new responsibilities. What steps can the business leaders take, or what should they take, maybe more specifically, that can drive that heightened level of discretionary effort amongst their teams in this area?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this when I travel across the country, and we work with business owners all over, and we call it our human capital development strategy. And we look at 9 different areas that can create, now this is going to sound pretty fancy, but so if you have a minimum requirement, which is your job description, and you're looking for discretionary effort, that discretionary effort will take that minimum requirement and then multiply that person's engagement, effort, all of the things that you're looking for. And so if you put together a human capital development strategy, there are 9 areas in which we look at, and one of them is culture, just exactly what Sarah was talking about. And the next one is hiring and recruiting. I'm going to go slow, so just in case you're taking notes, or if you want to listen to it later, you can. But so the first one's culture. Are they a good culture fit? What's your culture look like? Your culture is telling a story every single day about attracting and retaining talent. Hiring and recruiting plays off of culture. If you're looking for hiring top talent, your culture is going to tell that story, and your people are going to either promote it or not. Next is rewards, recognition, and compensation. So if you have a strategy based on your rewards, your recognition, and your compensation, what's that look like? The next one is liability and compliance. What is your liability and compliance strategy? The next one is your performance management strategy. After that, you have to look at your admin tech. How are you housing all of your information to help your people? The next one is you've gotten yourself to a point where you want to grow and you want to add new entities, mergers and acquisitions. And then the final two are leadership and communication. So those are 9 different human capital development strategies we use every single day that tie into what a business leader can do. So if you're a business leader right now and you're asking yourself a question, well, how in the world can I get all those things right? Ask yourself in each one of those: culture, hiring, recruiting, recognition, reward, compensation, liability, compliance, performance management, admin tech, mergers, acquisitions, leadership, communication. Do you have a strategy for each one when it comes to your people? And then now I'm going to get a little more to the relationship side, because for every process, there's probably a people problem. So for everything that we're about to implement as a strategy for human capital development, your people are going to have to, be a part of it. And so I say it this way: we create the climate and the connection for everyone to utilize their competency. So within all of those strategies, you have somebody that's either being, valued or not valued. They either feel connected or disconnected. The climate or the culture either allows it or it doesn't. I think Sarah said it really well. If you have a group and you're saying to yourself, I don't have time to do training and development, but they need those tasks, then don't do it. Don't hire people for their competency then, and then just take out of the equation that you're going to do training and development, because the last thing you want to do is promote that and say you do it and then turn around and that's really not your culture at all. Simple statement: leaders influence emotions, emotions drive people, and people drive performance. So those day-to-day operations of your frontline managers are helping connect and creating the climate for that performance. And this is my last thought on this. When you think of leadership and you think of how we move things forward, leaders are always pushing everything into the future. What are we doing in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4? We're always shooting for results in the future. Your people are always looking at the past, the last thing you did. So you can invite everyone to move forward with you, but they're going to look at the last way they were treated, the last thing that you did, and decide from there if they're willing to go forward with you. That's why the connect and the climate are so crucial, because if they're either willing or not willing to take their competency into the future with you, that has to do with how we're treating them in the connection that we create. So.
Yeah, that's good. Those 9 different strategies, obviously it's a lot to consider. But it's the foundation that if you're going to have discretionary effort amongst your existing teams, you have to have that foundation, those processes in place in order to effectively scale that. Again, a lot of this comes back to how do I even start? So Sarah, I want to go to you on that question. Pete, talked about a lot of different things, and obviously Insperity is a large organization. We pride ourselves on having, world-class training for both our sales and our service teams. And both you and Pete have been instrumental in building these models for our business. But for many in the call today, they may say, yeah, I agree. And I acknowledge the need for all of those things. I can't simply hire my way into this solution. I need that capability, but I don't have the time or the resources or maybe even the energy to know how to start. So Sarah, where do we begin to take this journey?
Yeah, well, easiest thing to do is hire Insperity, right? That was kind of a softball, but or if you're already an Insperity client, definitely use the resources. Just because they're available, a lot of folks don't make the time necessarily to focus on that. But if we think about it, someone who's not with Insperity today, every solution or every problem rather in a business has 3 possible solutions, right? You can insource a solution, you can outsource a solution, or you can do nothing. Doing nothing is an option. However, it's the least costly and the least painful for the short term. And it's oftentimes the most costly and the most painful over the long term, because your business stays stagnant and that problem never gets fixed. And so my best advice for a company when we're talking about training and development is, first of all, kind of what Pete alluded to in his opening comments, is you've got to start with the end in mind. I see a lot of business owners, a lot of business leaders who try to start with the solution. Right? I need to train on X, or I need to do whatever. Really, if you start with, I'm looking to fix X, because when it is fixed, I should see this result. I should improve communication, or I should create a better client experience, or I'm going to have more sales. Whatever the end result is, then working backwards to say, what particular skill set do I need to develop? What do we need to change in the business in order to get there? And then, is training appropriate? Now, if you determine after all that yes, I need some development, and then doing nothing is not an option because you figured out that you have a problem, then you have to look either internally at your company. Do you have the right resources internally? And then you simply need to make time to allow those resources to take advantage of their skill set to do it, or look outside for a resource to help. Whichever way you go, though, I think remembering, and again, I'm repeating some of the things that Pete said because I think they're really, really important. Training is not a one-time event. If there's one mistake that I see a lot of businesses make, is they say, oh, well, we trained on that, so they should know how to do it. Or we trained on that and it didn't work. Well, because training is not a one-time event. First of all, to learn something, you have to hear it multiple times, often in multiple different ways. And secondly, you can't just tell someone how to do something and then never come back and watch to see, was it done, provide feedback on whether it was done correctly. A true training and development program is cyclical. It's understanding what needs to be fixed and the why behind it, providing the appropriate level of training or knowledge to the field, allowing them an opportunity to demonstrate it so that you can assess whether they understood it. Often a teach back is a part of that. There's no better way to assess whether someone's really gotten it than to teach it back to you or to teach it to others. And then finally, to measure the results. And once you measure the results, if the problem is fixed, you can move on to the next problem, or if it's not quite there, you can start the circle again. But it's really about treating it as a process and having a real measurable finish line of what you're trying to get the training to do.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. I think we've learned that over the last couple of years more than ever. Whatever training we were doing, before the pandemic had to be reimagined, had to be reinforced, and potentially even redefined, depending on kind of what the new competencies and behaviors that we need within our teams are. Mm-hmm. Particularly if you're thinking about an organization that's hoping to lead in innovation. You can never just sort of rest on whatever yesterday's solution was. You always have to be thinking about the future, as we said a minute ago. So to me, this is a really important thing that we reinforce, that this is an ongoing process, and it requires the kind of time and commitment and the right kind of partnerships, be that internal or external, to make it happen. So Pete, let's talk about some of your experience. And you mentioned the idea of situational leadership earlier. I know that's one of the areas that you've taught on quite a bit. Your focused approach on situational leadership and that framework. Can you give us an overview of why that type of training is so important? And how it applies to maybe successful day-to-day management of people and process.
Yeah, I want to start with, if any of the business owners are out there and listening, is that 10 years ago when I was asked to create the leadership development piece of the Insperity sales part, I went to Paul, the CEO of the company, the original founder, and before I made a single decision about anything I was going to put together in leadership development, I asked what was his number one value. If he was going to think about leadership and leadership development for all of his sales managers, what would he say is the number one thing I needed to pay attention to? And he didn't even hesitate. And I think this is important. He said, if it doesn't deal with servant leadership, then I don't want you to even teach it. And so that gave me a guideline for immediately to think about what I would put into practice. So when you know your values, when you know what is the foundational piece, you can pick great outsourced consultants, training, development, And Ken Blanchard and their company they're second to none. They're incredibly good at what they do. And so it was easy for me to pick the things that I picked because Blanchard uses a formula that allows you to meet the person's need when they need it and develop them when they need it. So situational leadership creates a really great common language. And I think that's crucial because when you have a common language, you then have the ability for not only the leader to guide the employee, but the employee to turn around and ask for guidance. So if I need more direction, if I need more coaching, if I need to be supported in a certain way, if I need to just be left alone because I'm fully independent and autonomous, we have a common language that we can share with one another. And the more we make that part of our culture, not development, not just training. We did situational leadership one time. Well, that's training. We put that in a drawer. We don't ever even use it. But if we start to utilize it in more than one thought, then that really helps us solidify that as part of our culture. So that's one thing. The second thing is I wanted to share a couple of thoughts from it just as a overall aha moments from situational leadership. I try to share this every time. Competency has nothing to do with time or tenure. And it's a powerful thought process because over and over and over, what companies want to do is they want to say that people that have more time or more tenure are more competent. But if it's a brand new skill set, if it's brand new knowledge, a brand new goal, something that's changing, we all start over. So if, in the virtual world, when we all had to use Zoom again, everybody started over. In Blanchard's word, you'd say D1. Well, if we're not careful, we'll believe that everything we put in, time and tenure, equals demonstrated ability. That's not helpful. That's why it's a constant changing environment. This is another interesting one people will use a lot. Training best practices has nothing to do with your people's best practices. I know that sounds strange, but it's a great thought. It's a great thought. We're going to train in best practices. The problem is it's their best practice, not the other person's best practice. It takes time to get them up to speed to make them a best practice. And Sarah said it perfectly. What are you doing prior? What are you doing during? What are you doing after? How are you recoaching? How are you assessing that they actually got it? Because that's a full process in itself to make sure that that one person's best practice now becomes everyone's best practice. So be careful. Well, we've trained on best practices. Well, that's congratulations. That doesn't mean all your people have them. That person that was really good at it can do it. There's another big one. We fear micromanagement. So we often under-supervise, especially during change. Change is one of the times you need direction more than ever, because that's when no one knows what's going on. So when someone is lost, they need more direction. So be really careful during times of change that development and what you're doing allows a lot more direction. But people are like, well, I don't want to over direct. That feels like micromanagement. It's not. That's exactly what somebody needs, especially during change. They need a lot more direction in the beginning. And finally, last one, working harder is not a remedy for lack of knowledge or skill set. So I'll see a lot of leaders tell somebody, work harder, go, just put more effort. And the reality is if you can't do the demonstrated ability, working harder at something you can't do won't help you. That's like telling somebody that's going 60 miles per hour to go 120 miles per hour. Well, that's fine. I'm just going to be more lost more quickly. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that can't work harder. That's a completely different question. I'm just trying to get y'all to remember that in this world of training and development, to tell somebody to work harder that doesn't have the demonstrated competency is only going to make them more frustrated. All right. So there's just some insights on situational leadership and how we utilize it.
No, that's really good. It's very helpful.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah,
I'm
please do,
sorry.
Sarah.
Please.
I want to add on to something that Pete said. So first of all, situational leadership is one of my favorite things that Pete has ever taught me, which is saying something because Pete has taught me an awful lot. And I lead managers as well. And I firmly believe that being called a micromanager is probably the worst profanity that a manager can think of, right? And as a result, Pete, I think you'll agree, I think as a result, most leaders tend to skew so far the other way out of fear of being called that horrible, horrible word, a micromanager, that they're doing their people a disservice. I was
100%.
just having that conversation this morning with a manager who had kind of a bad experience earlier in his career. And so he had really kind of countered and gone the other way. To the detriment sometimes of his people. And so I gave him this example, and it's kind of a play on what Pete had taught me in situational leadership. So I'm here, I'm in a sales office that I'm visiting today. I haven't been here in a while. If I had rented a car at the airport, I have no idea how to get to this office. All I know is it's about half an hour away. What a lousy GPS if I would have plugged my address into it and it would have told me like, all right, I'm here if you need me. I'm going to check back in about 15 minutes and see how you're doing.
Right.
For those 15 minutes, I would have been frustrated and angry trying to find my way out of the airport and not knowing at all if I was going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So am I going to be upset that GPS is being highly directive and letting me know when that next turn is, and immediate correction? Hey, you missed that turn, make a U-turn. No, I'm going to appreciate that because I have no idea where I'm going. And I think that's what's so important to remember, is that when you bring someone new in, or to Pete's point, maybe they're tenured, but they're learning a new skill set, being highly directive is not micromanagement. It is by far the best thing you can do for that person.
Yeah.
And anyway, just such a great course. I know that's a little off topic with what we're talking about here, and you could do another whole hour on situational leadership. But it is, if you've never been through a course like that, I have to give it the props that it deserves.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. I love the analogy, and I think it's a helpful reminder that it's not just about the things you learn in the training curriculum. It's the on the job, it's the making the mistakes, it's the experiential part of it, right? And I want to dive into that a little bit more. So Sarah, let me kind of get your thoughts as someone who is sort of in the field, working day to day with new hires and with hiring managers and people who are making mistakes all the time, but they're doing that as part of their learning process. Talk about the importance of that experiential learning as part of the overall employee training and development piece.
Absolutely. So, especially when we're talking about adults, obviously, adults learn in all kinds of different ways. Kids too, I'm sure. But, as we become adults, there's so many different ways to learn. And what's really important as a leader who's developing people is having several different ways to explain or demonstrate or teach the same information so that it can be most effective for the person receiving it. So for example, here at Insperity, we have a combination when we're hiring new business performance advisors, our salespeople. We have a combination of classroom learning as well as sort of on-the-job training with their manager or with other experienced people to learn our process. But the most important thing when you think about that kind of doing type of training, that experiential learning, is it cannot simply be observational. I see a lot of managers making that mistake sometimes, is that they'll show them over and over again how to do something and get frustrated that maybe that person is not progressing. Remember that experiential learning, they have to do some of it themselves, skin their knees a little bit, make some mistakes, certainly pre-call plan, so that they know what they're going into. And then most importantly, debriefing and talking about it when it's done. Because learning, especially as an adult, is a series of steps. It is never I showed you how to do this once and now you should be perfect at it. Again, especially if we're compromising on some less developed skill sets in the people that we're hiring, we have to be prepared for the length of time that it's going to take, the repetition in that training, and giving people really an opportunity to do things and make mistakes with supervision, with some oversight, so they don't get, again, too far down the road where it's hard to recover. But I think that, that experiential learning is a huge part of the way that adults learn today.
Yeah. And Pete, I want to get your perspective on the same thing. And just as a reminder, we're talking a lot about driving innovation from within today. So that means we want to create a culture by design that welcomes that kind of risk taking, that kind of innovative thinking, which means that we're also creating a culture that embraces failure as kind of part of that normative process, right? So Pete, I think one of the risks that many business owners think is, well, I'd love to do that. I just don't have the time or the risk tolerance to allow for a lot of failure. I don't have that time to waste. I don't have those resources to waste. How do we wrestle with that? How do we balance those tendencies and those struggles?
Yeah, so remember, there's three parts: that competency, the connect, and the culture piece. And I was actually in, I think it was Sacramento, and there was a gentleman that was, he was a venture capitalist guy, and he had 40 different companies. And one of his 40 companies, he was talking about how they were really struggling with innovation and creativity. And so he asked me, well, how do you be more innovative and creative? Like, I just did a talk on something inspirational. It's like, how do you be more innovative and creative? And I thought, well, like, you can go do Pinot's palette or something, doing like an acrylic painting as a team. I'm just kidding. But the reality is that I asked him a simple question, and this is a principle type question when it comes to your culture. If you want your team to be more innovative or creative, what is your culture? How tolerant are you of innovation and creativity? And that is a principal question you can ask throughout everything that you're about to implement. So if the answer is, oh, we have a really high level of tolerance for innovation, creativity, we actually let people in the front line all the way up to the top give us ideas, thoughts, create more lean processes, everything else, then congratulations, you're probably going to be more innovative and creative. However, if the answer is, oh, yes, we love innovation and creativity, but there's two people that do it, and anybody from below you that actually says, hey, listen, I'm having an issue up front doing this process, we don't take information from you. And when you shut that down, they're going to learn quickly that you think innovation and creativity is important. It might even be a value, but no one's allowed to say anything. No one's allowed to talk about it. No one's allowed to share unless they're a certain level in your company. Well, that immediately shuts down the culture for innovation and creativity. So that's really the first thing, is that ask yourself in your company, what's your culture and tolerance for these different things? And so the question now goes, what's your tolerance for failure? How does your company embrace failure? I've heard people say, if you fail, I'll make you pay. Right? Don't ever make me look bad. That's probably not the one you're looking for if you want people to have a sense that they can fail. An old Zig Ziglar quote: failure is not a person. Failure is an event. Failure is simply a test of your commitment to succeed. Right? I always think about, if I go back to situational leadership, a little small thing. Don't take your people at their highest level of enthusiasm and lowest level of competency and make them fail over and over and over. That is a remedy to make them super frustrated. That's another example of what Sarah just said. Gary Ridge, the CEO of WD-40, for over 2 decades, he basically said this: take out the fear of failure. His whole culture was, oh, good, another learning moment. That's what he would talk about. And he would say this, he would say, be careful that you're not creating a culture that has a hiding mentality. Because if you're not careful, if you fail and you're afraid, then you'll hide it. And he said, we can't solve problems if everybody's hiding, what's going on. And then he finally said, I'm going to pay for it one way or the other. I might as well make it worth my money. If you're going to make a mistake, I want to know about it so we can solve it as a team. And then last thought, as a high school teacher, the very first I taught science, the very first thing I would put up on the board was these Japanese symbols, and they were on purpose so that, unless you spoke Japanese or could read Japanese, you didn't know what they were. And it was a simple quote that said, to ask is but a moment shame, but not to ask and remain ignorant is a lifelong shame. And the very first principle of the scientific method is to observe and state the problem and be willing to ask. And so from the very first day of teaching science, I would create a culture in my classroom that said, ask, 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 ask. Okay. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on that.
Good. Well, thank you. That's helpful. And I think it's such an important thing to remember, even in the midst of it, because it's easy to talk about it ahead of time, but it's really hard to sort of live it out in the moment. Yeah. Sarah, I want to pivot a little bit to more of the soft skills aspect of training. There's obviously the hard skills that employees have to learn to do their job, to master kind of the technical aspects of their role. And the training around that can oftentimes be pretty easy to quantify. Either you pass the test or you don't. Either you're certified or you're not. But building, a strong and resilient and innovative business like we've talked about here today is also about the soft skills that we need to master as well. So, things like adaptability and courage and communication and trust, right? Trust is such an important thing. All qualities that demonstrate this commitment to one another and to excellence. So how do we nurture those kind of qualities in our people and in our teams?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so much of it comes from the culture. I know we've talked about culture a lot today. Some of those soft skills people come with. When I talked about looking for internal drivers, that's exactly the type of thing that I'm talking about. And so, on the front end, interviewing and asking behavioral based questions so that you can identify, does that person have those within them? And then once they're on board, yeah, it's absolutely our role and responsibility as leaders to cultivate that and allow that to grow, because those sparks can easily go out in the wrong culture, right? Where there's not a culture of trust or that creativity or some of the things that Pete's talking about. Best thing I can suggest is you have to lead by example. If you're going to create a culture where failure is okay and it's something to learn from and grow from, you have to be willing to humble yourself and share your own stories of failure. I mean, I make it a point. I talk about every call I have ever messed up because I think that you learn from it and you can pass those lessons along. It humanizes you and it lets other people know, gosh, if Sarah's going to sit in a meeting and talk about something that she messed up, then it's probably okay for me to sit in a meeting and talk about something that I messed up. So I think it's really, really important that leadership is simply a reflection of what you want people to do. And I think that that so much of your culture comes from building a collaborative workforce. And so, communication is so key in these situations, and making sure that you are fostering an environment through your actions, not your words, that will elicit the type of behaviors and confidence that you're looking for.
Yeah, that is so important. That's such a foundational principle that I think we always have to come back to, leading by example. So thank you, Sarah, for that. Pete, we're going to begin to wrap up our session today. Really good content, really good, insightful information. You've been an educator and in training development your entire career, and so you have a unique perspective on this. When it comes to driving innovation, I think within an organization, it's one thing to build a team of really high performing individuals. But I think the most innovative and the most high performing organizations are the ones that have built teams that have those complementary strengths. So give us your perspective on the importance of building teams that have complementary strengths.
Yeah, if you think about complementary strengths, I typically will go to the personality information. They've got natural strengths and gifts that they shine with. Somebody that's a little more outgoing and task driven, or somebody that's a little more outgoing and people driven, or somebody that's a little more reserved and task driven, somebody that's a little more reserved and people driven. And so each one of them brings natural strengths to the table. I want to keep it as simple as I can, but at the same time, there's those natural gifts are either going to be used in your environment or they're going to be, taken out of it. And I'm trying to find a good analogy, and I don't know why I'm doing this right at the very second when I could have been prepared. But the reality is that, we spend our money in places that we like to spend our money in, right? We like, man, I've got all this ancillary money, or I've got this discretionary money, or I've got this money that's absolutely important and I've got to spend it. And we'll pick the right way that we're going to spend our money in places. I feel the same way about people's strengths and gifts. They'll either use them or they won't. And it all depends on the environment. You can have people that are being paid a ton and they're not going to use any of their gifts. They'll slowly start taking all those strengths and gifts and then removing them out of that environment, just like they'd remove them from a place that they spend money. And so I always like to go back to, I'm real hard on leaders because of what Sarah just said. We have the opportunity to be a blessing as a leader to other people through what we've learned and what we've garnered. And then by doing that, we turn around and embrace those skills and gifts. So I wrote this sentence down. Y'all can think about it or whatever, but I said, it's one thing to surround yourself by others that have great strengths and gifts. It's another to let them shine. It's two totally different things. So I want all these complementary strengths. I'm not sure if I want them to outshine me. Right. Mm-hmm. And so if you're in an environment where you want people to truly utilize their gifts and strengths, you're going to need to let them shine. Mm-hmm. I grabbed this book. It was How Full Is Your Bucket? It's Gallup's information. And one of the sentences in it says, in the last year, what percentage of the people have even been recognized for their talent or gift or strength by their employer, right? 65% of people surveyed had not received even a one-time thank you, So if you're going to have these strengths and gifts and all these things, every so often, you're going to have to actually recognize them so that people will actually use them. So, and then finally, now I'll get right to it. Here it is. The most powerful thing we have, the highest form of power in human beings that when we're working together is called synergy. I know that's, oh, wow. Are you kidding me? Yeah, synergy. So that's 1 + 1 = 3 or more. That's synergy. A good friend of mine that's in Sarah's area, his name's Doug Walker. He's an HR manager. He says that 1 + 1 that equals 3 is synergy. That's awesome, right? 1 + 1 that equals 2, that's samergy, right? So that's just, you get the same stuff. And then 1 + 1 and equals anything less than 1, that's lessergy or lamergy. And so because you're taking two people and now they don't trust each other, they're not working together, their complementary strengths are fighting against one another. There's conflict between those people that want to shine and don't shine. And the next thing you know, instead of getting 1 + 1 = 3, you've got two people that don't trust each other. You can throw all the complementary strengths out the window and ultimately you get lamergy or lessergy. So simply put, you can't synergize alone. You need the complementary strengths.
Yeah. I love the new vocabulary. That's really helpful.
Well, give it to Doug Walker because he's
good stuff, Doug. That's
he's the one
awesome.
that came up with it.
Yeah. Sarah, this is our last question for you. And I think it's one that has to accompany any discussion on training and development and innovation in general. And we think about the amount of change that we've been through over the last couple of years. The pandemic certainly has changed a lot about our workplace norms and have asked all of us to think in a way that's different or, potentially even innovative to try to continue to serve our customers and run our businesses. We've all had to adapt kind of to these new ways of working. And I think now more than ever, there is this issue of burnout that's becoming very real. And particularly when you're asking people to re-engage in training and development, to take on new ideas and to look at new approaches, they're having this real sense of being overwhelmed. So how do we balance, the ability to drive training and development and driving innovation and change within our workplace, particularly now, particularly with the environment that we're in? How do we do that, but also being mindful of the toll it's taking on our people, on our workforce, on our most important asset?
Yeah. So, certainly this hybrid and remote work has blurred the lines between work and life, right? In general, it all started, when we got email on our cell phones, didn't it? And all of a sudden we couldn't just shut down at the end of the day and then start up the next day. And it's just gotten worse and worse. And certainly since the pandemic with people working hybrid, it just feels like so many people are on 24/7. And then you compound that with businesses that are having trouble being staffed completely. And so more work is pushed on people. It absolutely is making burnout a real reality, in so many businesses. I think the first thing and most important thing to remember is anything you do to your people is not going to be well received. None of us like to have things done to us. And so if you're going to roll out even the most brilliant development program to increase all kinds of great efficiencies and make life easier for everyone, if you roll it out and you're doing it to your people, you're never going to get the kind of buy-in that you need. We've got to change one word. You can't do it to your people. You have to do it with your people. If you do something with your people and you bring them along on the journey, you're going to get so much more buy-in, so much more discretionary effort, so much more belief and commitment to the journey. It's what it's all about. And so that means don't create these problems or these solutions in a vacuum. Don't discuss them at the highest level and then roll them out to the field. Be a collaborative workplace. Bring new voices into the conversation. First of all, it's probably going to change and tweak the plan for the better, because the more information that you can gather and the more different unique perspectives you can gather, the better and more well-rounded the program is going to be. I'm going to end with something that Pete said. He said, that leaders look forward and individual, I'm going to butcher it, but this is what I took away from it. Leaders look forward, individual workers are looking backwards. And gosh, if you're driving, looking in the rearview mirror the whole time, you're probably going to hit something in pretty short order. And so when you're creating this type of development plan or program with your employees, it's just shifting them from looking behind them to looking forward, and you're all on the same path. And you hit less trees.
That's funny.
That's a great goal. That is a great goal to have. So, Sarah and Pete, it's been a great discussion. I know we could probably go another hour at least, but we've covered a lot of really good information that I think the business leaders on the call today will need to consider going forward. One of the things that I think we've all learned over the past couple of years is the reality of change and how we enable our teams to navigate through that change in a way that simply doesn't react your way through it, but to do it in a manner that envisions and communicates a better future, just like what Sarah was just referring to, one that actually makes your organization and your people stronger for having gone through it. And in Insperity, we share a set of core values that we seek to live by. They're reinforced in both explicit and implicit ways in everything we try to do. And one of those values is this: to embracing change as an opportunity to learn and improve. We know that change can be very difficult and even demoralizing for many, but it is the leader's role to help assure and inspire the team to embrace that change and use it as an opportunity to develop a new set of skills, both the hard skills and the soft skills, the things we've talked about here today, to transform your organization in ways that the comfort of status quo will quite simply never allow. So we hope that these insights will help you and your team navigate whatever change you're going through and to help you influence the mindset of your people to prepare for the future change, whatever that may be. And in Insperity, we're pleased to walk alongside our clients during such times, and we get to work together to find the best solutions for our people, equipping them and their businesses that they serve with the solutions and the insights to help them grow and adapt to whatever's coming next. So having a partner like this can make all the difference in the world. And that's why we believe that we're blessed to do what we do every day, and it really does make a difference. So if you'd like to learn more about Insperity and the range of human resources and business performance solutions that we provide, please visit Insperity.com and you can connect with one of our local certified business performance advisors today. And we'd be honored to help bring these kinds of solutions to you and your team in the same way that we've served tens of thousands of other growth-minded businesses just like yours. So thank you for joining us for this session of the Insperity Business Resiliency webinar series, and we look forward to speaking to you during our next session. So until then, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.